Oil prices and the current energy situation has been a market driver as of late. And ahead of today's Gains podcast, the Biden administration mentioned that they're going to be tapping the Strategic Oil Reserve. So I decided to reach out to a number of energy analysts that I've relied on over the years just to get their take on things. And after talking to several folks, I was like, I had to bring this on the podcast today to kind of set things straight regarding energy production and the energy issues that we're currently dealing with. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Energy policy, tapping into the country's strategic reserves, and what that means for the economy and financial markets. I'm Andy Gersher, and this is Gains. All right, so let's bring on Phil Flynn, Senior Market Analyst at Price Group here in Chicago. He's also a Fox Business News contributor. Hey, Phil, always great to have you on the Gains podcast.
Thank you, buddy. It's always great to be on with you, Andy. We go back a lot of years.
We certainly do.
We go back to when you used to do the Bears games, and they were actually good.
Yes, grateful I got to cover the Bears during some very good times.
I'm telling you, they should have signed you when they had the chance.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there you go.
So I got to tell you, Phil, I've been covering markets for 5 administrations. And I get it. There's a lot of politics involved in what individuals say and that kind of thing. But I got to tell you, in all these years of covering financial markets, looking at gold, oil, foreign currencies, and the likes, what I heard about the oil markets, domestic energy production, and tapping the country's strategic reserves was unbelievable, almost void of reality. And every analyst I've talked to, oil analysts that I've known for years and years and years, kind of agrees with me on this. And since it's a podcast and we can share our opinion, do you agree with that assessment of how off or how far from reality that discussion today and what they're doing and the explanation of why they're doing it and who's at fault? Do you agree with that assessment?
I agree with you. It's either, to use President Biden's word, which I used on the air, it's either total malarkey or they're just clueless when it comes to energy. It's like these guys have never looked at what's happened with the energy crisis back from the 1970s and what caused it and what happened. If you had to write a script to drive up energy prices, this administration has done it. They have made every wrong move at every key time in this entire energy move, and it's created the most pain for the American people and the poor and the middle class that I've seen in years. And, and Andy, you and I talked about this. I could see this coming a mile away. I mean, and President Biden told you this. People who are complaining about these high gasoline prices, they voted for this. If you voted for President Biden, he signaled all this stuff. He signaled he was going to kill the Keystone Pipeline. He signaled that he was going to go after the U.S. oil and gas industry. He signaled he was going to penalize these oil companies and tax these polluters. He was going to do everything he can. And he followed through, right? I mean, he killed the Keystone Pipeline. He put on new regulations. He discouraged investment openly in oil and gas. He put the Securities and Exchange Commission on a path that every public company in the world has to disclose their carbon footprint, with fossil fuels. And now they're saying that the government's done nothing to discourage production. I say malarkey. All of that stuff discourages production, and it all leads to higher prices, and that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, and then there's a blame game going around. Let's just start with what is the root cause of this. We saw energy running a lot longer before this whole Russia thing, and that's the problem when you start running your own domestic production lean. You start demonizing your go-to energy sources now, opting to try to go to sources that the technology is not quite there. The level of productivity that you would need from there isn't quite there. And then you have something like a Russia-Ukraine, which then even tips the scales even more. So let's just start with, there's a lot of blame, a lot of blame on Russia, but this was already put in motion. So let's start with the things that were implemented early on that, by the way, the Keystone would be up and running about now. Boy, we could use that Canadian oil. But, let's just start at the missteps that led to this. And, the Russia-Ukraine thing is a factor, but there were so many missteps that led up to this, and then this, Russia-Ukraine thing's a final dagger. So talk about some of the missteps that have led to this, and then we can delve into some of these other issues as well.
I think we need to go back to the Keystone XL because that became what should I say? It's not the Keystone Pipeline was never about reality. It became a talking point. Right. It became a metaphor for green energy versus oil energy. And if you go back to the many years to the Obama administration where they kicked the can down the road and we might not approve it. And first it was because the pipeline's going over the aquifer, and that proved to be not true because you got tons of pipelines going over the aquifer. So why is this one any different?
Right.
But then it came down to the truth. The Canadian oil was dirtier and whatever. So it became actually a political rallying point of green energy versus anti-energy, right? So Obama killed it. Trump put it back in play, and because Biden doesn't like Trump and he doesn't like oil companies, he killed it. But when he killed it, it became a metaphor for investment in U.S. energy. If you were like TransCanada and you had to invest, millions and millions and millions of dollars and get approval and go for 20 years of investment, time, legal bills, and get approval for a pipeline to only have it killed by a president on a whim on an executive order, that sends a signal to everybody who invests in the United States that your capital is at risk. This government can shut you down with an executive order if you invest in something that they don't like. And so if you're going to invest in fossil fuels, you're going to be very careful because you don't know if your project's going to get shut down or if they're going to raise the taxes or the royalty rates on what you own, or if they're going to put on new regulations that's going to make it impossible for you to make a profit, and this was a signal. So what we saw is the flight of capital away from the U.S. energy industry. At a time where you and I know, Andy, when prices start to go up, usually people are throwing money at this because they know this thing's going to go up. They're short of supplies. Let's get in on this thing. The money isn't coming, not like it would in the past. Why? Because the government's getting in the way. So that has reverberations around the entire industry, and that's why we're not seeing now they're blaming the oil company. Well, it's the oil company. You're not doing your fair share. You should be taking risks with your money. We're not doing anything to stop you. And I say malarkey. They've done everything they can to stop them, and now they're accusing them of price gouging when they failed to raise production after the administration did everything they could to discourage production. It's nuts.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, first of all, oil wells aren't just turnkey. There's a lot of infrastructure. And then once you even extract it out of the ground, you have to get it to where it needs to be refined and so forth. So when you start demonizing it ahead of time, if you, and they basically demonized it. And then you also have this strong green energy push. And there's even been questions on where some of that money has come from. You make it difficult to make these investments. You demonize these oil companies, and then that's where I wanted you to pick up. They're talking about charging these companies for permits that they haven't utilized. Explain that. This is just more malarkey, and I just think that people really need to understand And this is when I thought it was real rich, when they started talking about actually fining these companies for not utilizing permits that they've had access to. Explain why that is just crazy.
It is, because first of all, there's so many things. Number one, a lot of times when these companies buy these leases, it's like buying a subdivision, right? If you buy a huge subdivision, to build houses on, maybe not every lot in that subdivision makes sense to build on, right? It might be hilly, it might be, now some might be prime in the middle of the subdivision, but and that's what it's like when you buy some of these oil leases. Some of them may or may not have oil on them at all, right? And some of them may have some oil supplies, so when they come in and buy these leases, it's hit or miss. They don't know what they're buying. The government doesn't guarantee, hey, guys, risk your money, take these leases, and I'll guarantee you'll get oil and gas out of them.
And an enormous amount of funding to actually go for the exploration. And again, you're not guaranteed. That's a great point. So when you demonize the funding, and that's not there, it really makes exploration very difficult. And I just think it's rich when we heard that now these companies may even be potentially fined.
Yeah, it's crazy. Fine for doing business. Listen, the government shouldn't force you to be in a business where you have to lose money. They shouldn't mandate that you have to be in business to lose money. Really? And listen, you take it a step further, and you talk about these oil leases, okay? The other thing is that when they bought these oil leases, there was a different president in place, right? A guy that you thought, you could get a pipeline built, right? Or that you could drill a certain way,
right?
So you have an EPA. You've got every one of these financial things, and under President Trump, I was doing the energy summit with Fox Business, and I had a long talk with Larry Kudlow, of course, economic advisor for President Trump. We were talking about this, and I said to him, it's ridiculous because these guys can't get projects approved. And he said, he goes, Phil, that is exactly what we did with the Trump administration. When we were in office, we got the time to get, an oil project approved, and not just oil. We're talking streets and bridges and stuff, the approval time down from 4 to 5 years, down to under a year at some point, and sometimes just a few months. Okay. And what's happened is there's so many different agencies, EPA, FERC, all these companies that are getting involved. So, we can build an entire project faster than we can get one approved. That's madness.
It really is.
And that kills the U.S. infrastructure. So, it's out of their mind. Listen, we have restrained refining capacity. Regulations from the Biden administration, when we had refineries that were shutting down because of COVID, they were ready to reopen, but they didn't want to because of the signals sent by the Biden administration. So they're like, we're not going to deal with it because we're afraid of the regulations. We're much better off shutting down. So the refining capacity of U.S. refineries is down like 10 or 20% from what it used to be. So now we're trying to squeeze more blood through the turnip, and people are wondering why prices are going up. And this anti-pipeline policy. I think the Biden administration learned when Russia hacked the Colonial Pipeline, the pipelines are important, but they fought. They've never met a pipeline that they like, except one that was shut down, and then they realized, holy smokes, we need pipelines. So this religion, when it comes to the Biden administration of an anti-fossil fuel program, has hurt the American people. It's hurt the economy, and now when it's going bad, then they blame the people that they suffered. It's sort of like. You get a prisoner and you torture him, and then you blame him for getting blood on the ground. It's nuts.
Yeah, it's amazing, and this isn't political at all. Because I was just doing the math here. You got 180 million that they're looking at tapping the reserve, right? The strategic reserve. Right. Okay, I'm doing the math. That's 6 months. Boy, that takes you right near the midterms. So this isn't political at all, huh? And explain this too. The tapping I mean, on top of it being political, and I get that goes on, but tapping the strategic reserve, there's times that you tap it and there's times you don't. And explain, I don't think the benefit is necessarily there. And then you tap it for when you really, really need it due to storms, war. Explain that.
Yeah, I mean, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was never meant as a price manipulation tool. It was meant for a disruption. And the White House now has added, price manipulation to the value. The thing is, if you want to control the global oil market, okay, with releases from the reserve, you better build that Strategic Petroleum a lot bigger, because you've got to, you're releasing, how many barrels of oil we're talking now?
We're talking a million barrels a day, a total of 180 million barrels. You look at that, that's 6 months.
Yeah. And the world consumes over 100 million barrels of oil a day. Okay, so out of that, so when you put that in perspective, so you're going to try to control 100 million barrels with a million barrels a day. Like I say, you can't do. It's like trying to control a wild bucking bronto. With the feather, it's not going to work, right? So this administration has made every economic mistake that it could with energy, and it doesn't. They don't even know. Now they're talking about energy independence. They're trying to bring up, the same way. Remember when
we were energy independent and one of the global leaders in energy production just 2 years ago.
We were a net exporter for the first time since Harry Truman was president, for heaven's sakes, under Donald Trump. We led the world in new technology because of American ingenuity and high prices.
Fracking and the fracking technology. Didn't that come from North America?
It did. George Mitchell, who is probably the godfather in a great American story, they were talking about making his birthday a national holiday, which I think would have been right around now, because this is a guy that took his own capital. They said, and it's like back then, it's like, the world's running out of oil. Oh, woe is me. In the United States, we're just doomed to run out of oil.
Peak oil, remember the talk?
Hope. But George Mitchell didn't believe it. He took his own capital, tried to find ways to raise production through Shell. He failed. Did it again. They laughed at him and said, "You're crazy, George. Quit it." Did it again. But then the damn fool went ahead and did it anyway. The story of America, right? And he unlocked the shale revolution. It changed the world and made us energy independent. But now, prices then came down for years. Our prices over the last, few years were lower than they were since the First World War when you adjusted for inflation, and you get complacent. Oh, well, energy prices are cheap. Well, these big oil companies will just, we'll just go to green energy. We don't need those. Guess what, guys? Guess what? You were spoiled with low energy prices. And when people say, the impact on the environment is horrible, and I say, listen, we are the cleanest producers in the world. The impact on the human race from fossil fuel production has a lot more positives than it does negatives on the earth. You know what? Fossil fuel production keeps billions of people alive every day. People that can have air conditioning, where years ago they would have died because of heat stroke. That wouldn't have been possible without fossil fuels. Roads. I mean, I could go on. Clothes and bridge. I think it's kind of funny. I run into, young kids, and it's like, we're anti-fossil fuels. I go, what about your carbon footprint? I cut down, I drive this kind of car and I only do this. And I go, yeah, but look at that jacket you're wearing. It's made out of fossil fuels.
And take those electronic devices out of your pocket, by the way, because a lot of the components there are made with it. And that's what we're going to talk about We're going to take a quick break here, and we'll be right back. We're going to talk about then the fallout and plays that could potentially be made here. Hey, be sure to subscribe, follow, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If that's an option for you, that is podcast gold. If you could do that for us, that would totally be a solid. And as always, subscribe and turn on those notifications so you know when a new Gains episode drops. We drop Gains episodes on Wednesday and Friday mornings. So we'll be right back with Phil Flynn, Senior Market Analyst for the Price Group, talking energy right after the break.
If you enjoy learning about communities, culture, and history, then Shades of the City podcast is for you. We will bring you stories like the legacy of Johnson Publishing Company, most notably known for Jet and Ebony magazines.
Basically what the world said African American people could not do, these magazines proved otherwise.
Subscribe now to Shades of the City on the Odyssey app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Back with Phil Flynn, Senior Market Analyst for the Price Group here in Chicago, Fox Business News contributor, longtime energy analyst. You know, going into the break, we were talking about how oil and petroleum, it's in everything. And it was interesting today watching the market after the announcement of tapping the oil reserves. Market started sliding. Stocks really took it to the chin. And I was wondering, petroleum and all of this is such a big part of our economy, beyond just transporting goods, people and goods. Also, we just listed some of the things that are produced with petroleum, such a cornerstone to the market. And hey, I'm for environmentalism too. I'd love to, go out and buy a $50,000 to a $75,000 electric vehicle that I could plug in. $50,000 to $75,000.
You would look good in that.
Yeah, that would be great. And I'm not.
Yes.
Yeah, I see. This is where we're going, long term. But a lot of this technology isn't ready. A lot of the alternatives they're using isn't nearly as productive as petroleum. So we wanted to talk about the fallout. This could lead to some big-time problems. The Dow Theory is bearish right now. They indicate sometimes weakness. And I'm wondering if all these kind of indicators are pointing to a further weakness in the economy. And I'd like to get your take on what's the fallout here from this mismanagement and now the Russia-Ukraine thing and all these balls in the air. And then you got energy just soaring. So what could be the fallout here?
Well, I think the stock market would have had the worst quarter in many, many years. I forget exactly how many. It was a terrible quarter. It's the best quarter this year, but it's, but we're just getting started. Listen, at the end of the day, I actually think next quarter is going to be pretty good. I think corporate profits are still pretty long. And one of the sad things, I hate to say, is that you don't want to be short the stock market in times of war. And to be honest with you, you've got a lot of goods that are in tight supplies. So a lot of commodity stocks are going to do very, very well. Energy stocks, food stocks, you name it. But you're right. We had an inverted yield curve that sometimes and many times talks about a recession. But, if you look at that historically, it doesn't happen overnight. It could be a couple of years down the road. It could be 3 years down the road. And so I wouldn't worry about that in the short term. So I'm looking for a big rebound here. But, the Biden administration has to keep quit making these missteps, right? One after another that continues to confound everybody. That can anybody say that they have a coherent energy policy? I mean, what is their energy policy? Can you tell me?
Right.
It's
very unclear.
They don't have one. I mean, we don't like fossil fuels. We're killing pipelines. Oh, we're mad at oil companies because they're not producing more oil. Oh, they have a moral responsibility to raise production, but we're against production. Oh, we want you to raise production. Okay, but what pipeline am I going to use? Oh, well, you can't build a pipeline. I mean, is there any wonder why there's such disarray and discouragement in investing in fossil fuels? it kind of reminds me of the Jimmy Carter days. So many, we keep going back to the 70s. Listen, Jimmy Carter, nice guy. But again, he had the same kind of policies that were just a mismatch of confusion, and it led to a lack of confidence.
I was a kid at the time. We were living in the Washington, D.C. area, Northern Virginia. I remember where we would just wait in these long lines just for gasoline, and it seems like we're almost gone ahead of that way again.
Yeah, odd and even days, right? You look at your gas tank, we had to ration gasoline. Listen, we're America. We shouldn't have to ration anything. We are the country that's blessed with some of the greatest natural resources that God ever put on any country on the face of the earth. And yes, have we sometimes exploited those resources in a bad way? Back in the olden days, yes. But I would say that U.S. energy producers and producers in general are the most responsible producers anywhere on the planet right now. I think that, we need to go back to exploiting our own resources, not become dependent on dictators for oil and ask them for supplies, not becoming dependent on China for rare earth. Listen, one thing I will agree with on the Biden administration, they want to use the War Power Acts to increase the productions of minerals that can, create the fuels of the future like batteries and things like that. I'm all for that. But if you look at the track record of the Democrats in recent years, they haven't been for that. They haven't been for, more mining for these kind of minerals. They've been against it. Now they're for it because they want electric cars. Okay, fine. If you want to use the War Powers Acts from the 1950s, go ahead, go for it. I'm all for that. But at the same time, why don't you use these so-called War Power Acts to incentivize U.S. oil and gas production? Why is it only the green energy people that get a break, and the big oil companies get all the grief? The energy companies are the ones that are carrying the load here. They're the ones that have taken the risks. They're the ones that give a boost to our economy. Look what's happening in the Chicago area, right? Lori Lightfoot, she raises gasoline taxes. Hey, that's our, little piggy bank. Just, oil and gas will just put a tax on it.
And on top of it, you heard the latest today too, and this is really sad. They actually have to have a lottery that they're giving out $150 gas cards to ease the brunt of all of this for people in the Chicago area. Why do we have to do that? I mean, it's unbelievable. Now we're actually, the government is having to give out gas cards, and now it's a lottery. So your luck of the draw, it just depends on your luck of the draw. Well, maybe it'll ease the burden for you if you're lucky enough to win the lottery and you get the gas card. How about those people who don't win the lottery on these? Yeah,
it kind of reminds me of the play Evita, right, where they used to doll, "Oh, please, Gentileva," and she would give her favor to a few people, and but come on, listen. This is crazy because you're right. The government's like, they take away and then they decide, oh, I'll give one to you, and maybe you can win the lottery, and it's like, why don't you help us every day, okay? Don't look at us as your political piggy bank, and don't give me some little gift card just because your poll numbers are terrible and you have to win the midterms or you have to win the next election. Don't patronize me, okay?
Right.
Lori Lightfoot, government, don't pay, go back and fix the problems. Part of the problems that you cause by your policies. You have a lot to answer for. All these politicians, everybody, and listen, everybody that voted for anybody has listen, there's been a lot of mistakes on both sides of the aisle.
Oh, yeah, in all fairness, listen, we don't want to necessarily pile on, and again, this is one of many issues, but when we're talking energy, and like I said at the beginning, I've been covering markets, energy, gold, foreign currencies for literally 5 administrations out of all these different years. Today was just an eye-opener, and I almost felt like somebody's got to, set the record straight somewhat. And I started getting on the phone with people that I trust in the industry. You're at the top of that list, Phil, and all of them are pretty much in line with you and scratching their heads right now. And I guess that's the next thing is, we've seen a bit of a pullback. So we saw oil peak a couple weeks ago. We've seen a bit of a pullback. Are we through the worst of this, or is there still worse to come?
I don't think the worst is over. Listen, I mean, we definitely built in a war premium when the prices went up on the invasion, and we're taking some of that war premium out. And think what happens when there is a war, people have to panic buy and they hoard supply. I mean, and so you get a situation where, oh my gosh, they're going to cut off Russia's supply. We're going to need this oil. Well, let's buy up everything we can right now. Well, the prices are going up. Well, buy it up today because we don't know if we're going to have it next week, right?
Right.
The prices go up. Then all of a sudden you buy extra supplies. It's sort of like, when there's a snowstorm coming and everybody runs to the grocery store and buys all the milk, right? And buys the bread. But then
the toilet paper.
You got milk and bread and nobody buys it next week, right? Yeah, toilet paper. You still have some from the COVID shit.
Oh, I do. I'm sitting probably on 100 rolls still.
At least. Well, you never know. It could come in handy. So, yeah, you're right. So getting back to that, so then, the prices leveled down. But listen, we have had a situation where investment in energy, even before COVID, was not coming back. And a lot of it was because of the anti-fossil fuel agenda. President Biden doubles down on bad policy. But if you go to the bad policy started really under Obama, okay? It started with the Paris Climate Accord, right? And if you go back to those things, that's where this anti-fossil fuel agenda really began. President Trump turned things around. He's like, we're getting out of this stupid thing. It doesn't make sense. We're going to produce our energy at home, right? And then, that's terrible. What a terrible guy. Well, in 4 years, you saw what happened in the U.S. production. It went through the roof. It hit record highs and would have kept going if it weren't for the COVID situation, right? So it was an amazing thing, and then President Biden gets in and tries to undo everything he did for 4 years, and now you're wondering why we're going the same route that happened in Europe. Listen, thank God that President Trump slowed down this energy transition in the United States, because look what's happened in Europe. They had nobody to step in their way. They ended up closing down nuclear power plants. They didn't build pipelines. They shut down natural gas fields.
Germany relying on Russia, huh?
Yeah, it's nuts. Yeah, and it's like, hey, let's close down the nuclear power plants and try to replace one nuclear power plant. How many wind turbines do you think it takes to replace one nuclear power plant, huh?
Oh my gosh, I would think 100 square miles of. It's amazing, like either solar, wind.
One everywhere. I tell you, the birds flying through there wouldn't have a chance. But yeah, I mean, listen, I mean, this is the kind of madness that we've been putting. And you're right. Who's behind the green energy agenda? Who's making billions of dollars on this? That's questions you've got to ask. Why are billions of dollars of taxpayer monies being taken from the rich oil companies and given it to the poor green energy companies that, even with all the massive investment over the last 20 years in green energy, they can't even produce 20% of the energy? I mean, somebody's got to sit down and do the math and say, this ain't working. Listen, and that doesn't mean you can't get cleaner, you can't use new technologies, but don't shut down the old technologies until you have something to go. And everybody says, well, we have to do it because we're trying to save the planet. Well, I don't think you're going to save the planet this way. You're just going to prolong the problem, because when you do things that are not economically efficient, it's doomed to failure. And we're seeing failure. That's what, let's call it what it is. We have a failed energy policy in Europe. It led to a war. It led to shortages. It led to record high prices. We have a failed energy policy in the United States. It's a failure. But President Biden tells me he needs to double down on his commitment to green energy, not admit that he's wrong.
The final thing I wanted to talk about, because you mentioned this too, is, I had mentioned that the Dow Theory is bearish, and we've seen a bit of a pullback here. You made an interesting point about markets rallying during wars often. How do you see the broader markets? I mean, obviously you're an oil analyst, but you watch stocks in the broader markets, and it all plays into everything. So what's your kind of read right now?
I think we're going to have a killer quarter. I mean, I think there are elevated recession risks. Okay. But I think all the bad news is in the corner. Everything, what hurt us? The war in Ukraine. Well, that's kind of known now, right? We were worried about rising interest rates. Oh my gosh, you're going to raise the interest rates by half the 50 basis point. Well, guess what? They are probably. That's kind of priced in the market, right? The uncertainty about everything. So you look at that, markets sell off on uncertainty. We're going to have a lot more certainty in the next couple of weeks. We're going to have a clear direction on which way the Fed's going. We're going to have a better direction on the war in Ukraine. And more than likely, it's going to continue. It looks like a stalemate. And generally, what that generally means is that, the defense sector does very, very good. The commodity sector is going to do very, very good. You have restrained supplies, so you want to look at the companies that are going to take advantage of that. And at the end of the day, it's what do they say the stock market runs on? Profits, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And even though the profits are weak, the profits are still the best they've been since the 1950s in the last quarter. So I think the market's like, saying, hey, wait a second, and I don't think profitability is going to go away overnight. The inverted yield curve, if you look at the history on that, a lot of times, it doesn't mean a recession's tomorrow. It could be a year or 2 years away. And a lot of times after the inverted yield curve, you get a huge run up in the stock market. So, I just think that, despite all the fears, the market has held up pretty good. And I would look for a pretty good recovery coming up in the new quarter.
Now, I have to say, and I always share my plays, full disclosure, right now I have a triple short ETF on the Dow right now. That's ProShares Ultra Pro Short Dow 30, the ticker SDOW. Kind of like holding that on a day when the Dow's down 500 plus points.
It feels pretty good today.
Yeah, it feels good today. I'm there with you. I think there's a little bit more downside. But I think once we do clear some of this uncertainty, I think we will go down and test those lows. But, what do I know? I mean, I'm listen to me for fun,
No, I think you're right. Well, an old trader once told me, he said, Philip, what kind of business are you in? I go, well, the commodity business, oil trading. No, what kind of business are you in? I'm like, I don't know. He goes, a profit-taking business. So there's nothing wrong with taking profits if it's looking your way.
Yeah.
No, listen, I think a triple short was a great play. And you have a lot of reasons to think that way because you got rising interest rates, you got uncertainty, whatever. And listen, I think you can do good. But like I say, Warren Buffett, he's one of the guys that says you don't want to be short stocks when there's a war because usually when there's a war, the demand for goods are high. And generally speaking, a lot of people say, World War II is one of the reasons why we got out of the recession because we had to ramp up to produce everything for the war. So
look at the chart on the market.
It is bullish.
Yeah, you look at the chart on the market. That's exactly what happened. And one thing I do want to mention about shorting, I always use this as a very, very short-term thing, and especially with the triple velocity. So I'm not going to be holding this for a very long time. When I see opportunities, things get frothy, then I'll do that. But it's still building that dry powder that I eventually want to put to work. Okay, as we wrap up the Gains podcast, any final parting shots, Phil? We've had a great conversation.
No, I had a great conversation. I would like to, do a quick plug. We did the energy conference with Fox Business Network, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it live. They're going to replay it, but you can see it on Fox Nation. So the Fox Nation app, you can get a free trial for it, and you watch the Energy Independence Summit. I was on with Larry Kudlow, Maria Bartiromo, Jackie DeAngelis, all the great Fox people and some of the top analysts in the industry. So go on Fox Nation, watch that, sign up for my daily energy report, email me at pflynn@pricegroup.com, and we can get you all set up on that. And it's free, which is, you don't get free lunches anymore, right, Andy?
Right. And get that email one more time because, take Phil up on that offer. What do you got?
Flynn, my initial Flynn, at pricegroup.com.
And again, that's Flynn, FLYNN, at pricegroup.com. Can people reach out to you to get more information on this? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Call me anytime, 888-264-5665. Just give me a call, and if I don't pick up, leave a message. I will get back to you.
Take Phil up on that. And again, big thanks to Phil Flynn, Senior Market Analyst for the Price Group here in Chicago and Fox Business News contributor. And then, as always, be sure to subscribe, follow, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, if that's an option for you. And as always, subscribe and turn on those notifications so you know when a new episode drops. We are back with a Gains episode next Wednesday morning, and we're going to talk to the CEO of the Crypto Chicks NFT. So that's a must listen. Love talking about NFTs. I'll see you on Wednesday morning.
A News Radio WBBM podcast powered by Odyssey.